are at either of the administration tables on either side. That way we can access you when we have questions for you. But if we can get everyone to begin taking your seats, I'll go ahead and begin a countdown for purposes of Metro Nashville Network. And so that countdown will begin now, and that will be 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, well, thank you, everyone. This is a special called meeting of specifically of the Planning and Zoning and Budget and Finance Committees of Metro Council. I'm pleased to be joined by my co-chair, Budget and Finance Committee Chair, Councilmember at Large Berkeley Allen. The topic of this meeting pertains to the East Bank planning study that has been going on for about a year and a half, as well as the items that are in the capital improvements budget that are specific to that planning for future infrastructure and growth along the East Bank. We have quite a few panelists who have joined us today, and I'm really appreciative for each of their time. Just a few of those are Dr. Carol Busey, who is our county historian, who's in front, and Dr. Busey will be going first and giving us some information about the history of the East Bank. We also have Planning Director Lucy Kempf and some of her team who will be providing a presentation about the East Bank planning study as a whole. We're also joined today by Steve Bland, who's the CEO of WeGo. We have Director Diana Alarcon from the Nashville Department of Transportation and Multimodal Infrastructure. I'm really excited to have Mr. Paul Deggs with us today, who is TDOT Deputy Commissioner and Chief Engineer, and he shared with me that he is a McGavock High School graduate and is very excited about some of these things that we hope to bring improvements to the Davidson County area. So with that, we'll go ahead and begin. I do want to have a presentation from our panelists, and then if folks can kind of hold your questions, I will call on you a little bit later on for more in-depth discussions. Chair Allen, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
No.
Not at this time?
No, at this time.
Okay. Well, I will go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Carol Busey.
Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be here. It's always a pleasure to have another opportunity to talk. I'm not loud enough, am I? To talk about Nashville history. And I think the history of Nashville is so important with so many new people coming, because all of us, whether we came with James Robertson, whether we actually had Native American ancestors who lived here, we all came from somewhere else, and now we see these hordes of people coming, and it's important that we understand that this is not a new development. It has happened throughout our history. And so here I want to make sure that everybody understands where Nashville is. You see on your map, you see Davidson County there. The dark green area is the Central Basin, and this is this bed of limestone. And as you see that lighter green area around the map, that is the Highland Rim, which is like a soup bowl around the whole area of the Cumberland Basin. Now you see also that part of the southwest part of Davidson County and the northwest part of Davidson County are on the Highland Rim and not in the Central Basin. And this has created air pollution problems pretty much since the beginning of time. So here I want you to make sure that you understand this, because most people don't really recognize the fact that the Tennessee River and the Cumberland River never touch, that they are completely different rivers. So here you see on this map up here, if my pointer will reach that far, you see that Cumberland River beginning in southeastern Kentucky, Harlan, Kentucky. It begins there and it makes its meandering route down into across the Central Basin, and then it goes up the Highland Rim and goes on up and flows into the Ohio River. The Tennessee River starts just above Knoxville, where the Holston and French Broad rivers come together there and form the Tennessee. And as you see from this map, map, it drops down into Louisiana. I mean, not Louisiana, Alabama. I do know where my states are. Alabama, it drops down into Alabama before heading northward to the Ohio River itself. So here we are in the Cumberland River Valley, and this is the area that James Robertson saw fit to plant a settlement. He was an agent, if you will, for a land speculating judge in North Carolina, Judge Richard Henderson, and he had come over here to stake a claim during the Revolutionary War. Now, yes, the Native Americans had been here. The Shawnee had been pushed out by the Chickasaw in the west and the Cherokees in the east, and so this area in the Cumberland Basin here, where James Robertson decided to relocate a group of people, seemed to be empty when they came. Now, why did they come here? That's what we want to ask all these people out here on the streets, don't we? Why did you come here? What brought you here? What brought all of us here? Well, the reason that this appealed to James Robertson was that the Native Americans who hunted in this area a great deal hunted here because there was so much salt. This area, as you see these various springs and mounds, are places where salt comes up naturally out of the ground, and sometimes there's a spring associated with it, and so that's what attracted the mammals that they hunted, and that was a necessary thing for survival. And so James Robertson, when he came over here the first time to pick the place before he brought settlers over, he decided that this was an ideal spot. Some say that he referred to it as the Eden of the West. It was so beautiful here with all of these birds and luxurious farmland around, potential farmland around the area, and so that's why he picked this place. Now, he picked this specific place almost exactly where you all and I are sitting here because he had to bring people back, and so he had to have some kind of identifying landmarks. So he's situated where he was returning with the settlers between the French Lick Creek, sometimes called the French Creek, the Lick Creek, the Salt Lick Creek, which is just over here behind us almost, and then Browns Creek. Now, can you go take your boat and go down either one of these creeks today? No, they are still there, but they are under big conduits. Browns Creek, as you will recall, is more or less under the Skirmerhorn Symphony Center over there, and you can't see the mouth of it where it flows into from anywhere except from the river. So I want you to look at this map because what a madcap plan this turned out to be. James Robertson is going to lead a small party of men up through the Cumberland Gap, down to the Salt Lick, through Kentucky and down, and John Donaldson was going to supposedly have the easy route, taking the women and children and a few older men who weren't able to walk that far in these big, large rafts from up above Knoxville. You see Fort Patrick Henry up there where Kingsport is, down the Tennessee River, through the Muscle Shoals, to the Ohio River, then up the Ohio and up the Cumberland. Had anybody ever done this before? No one had. So they had heard some things from some of the Native Americans that this was a river that went all the way to this much bigger river, but nobody had ever tried it. So a good number of the people in the Donaldson Party did not survive. But they finally got here. The men with Robertson arrived in late December of 1779, and Donaldson's party doesn't arrive till late April of 1780. Now, here you see the mouth of Browns Creek right there. I took that from a boat in the river, that photograph of a boat in the river. And if you ever have a chance to go boating, I really encourage you to put your boat in the water up at Shelby Park. There's a boat ramp there that's not very visible. And go down the river past the prison. You'll see the mouth of White's Creek and Richland Creek, and it's really quite interesting to see these. These are the only two covered up with a conduit. So here you see the mouth of the Salt Creek, and you have to look to find it down there. I wouldn't have found it if I hadn't had somebody showing me where it was, somebody from the water department. So it was also there were these large bluffs around here, and you and I don't see those bluffs because now, with the dams, Old Hickory and Percy Priest, the level of the river is much higher than it was before. But I want to go back here for just a second to this map here, because the place that Richard Henderson had negotiated was on the north side of the Cumberland River. Now, looking at this map, you say, well, where these creeks are is sort of the west side of the river, because the river has so many of these big loops in it, these bends in the river, but technically where we're talking about tonight, the East Bank was the end of Henderson's land claim, and yet Robertson and his men crossed the river that day in December by foot. The river was frozen, and they walked over, and here, sure enough, was Browns Creek and Salt Creek, and they claimed their land. And so when the women arrived, they had 10 years of contested warfare, because the Native Americans realized these people were coming here to stay and were not going to leave willingly, bringing women, children, and domesticated animals. But things get organized pretty well, and so by 1784, the Indian warfare is dying down to some degree, and so they hire Thomas Malloy to lay out a grid for an actual town. And as you see, there is the Cumberland River there. It has a public square, and some of these lots are reserved for education. The Scots-Irish who signed the Cumberland Compact on April the 1st, May 1st, 1780, were very organized and interested in education, so they immediately saved some of these lots for an educational institution. So here you see the streets as they were originally laid out. Now, that first wave of settlers here didn't really make a lot of money. It was the second waves that came in later, the McGavoks, the Grundys, and these others, that really became the wealthy elite as this pioneering generation begins to die out. The McGavock family came fairly early, before statehood, and as you will see here, you see the grid for Nashville on this map, and then you will see McGavock has claims in both the western side and the eastern side of the Cumberland River there. So he will have a great deal of influence in the development over there. One of the reasons we've got to look at, why did this side of the river grow so much more quickly than the east side? Well, it was really because Robertson had situated this here, and once people started claiming their land claims of generally 640 acres a square mile, they were really in desperate shape to stay where they were. They wanted to stay on Richland Creek. They wanted to stay wherever they were. And so here you see the place on this side of the river beginning to flourish, but not a lot of people living on the eastern side of the river. And so here the War of 1812 transforms this place on this side of the river into an absolutely thriving business center, because first of all, Andrew Jackson comes home from the war and puts Nashville on the map as the war hero, the second George Washington, and second of all, it was the steamboat that came. Now, let's look at this, because most of you know more or less what happened in between here and the 1870s and 80s after the Civil War, when the East Bank becomes industrialized. You have, for the first time after the Civil War, you have logging, massive amounts of logging taking place up on the Cumberland Plateau, and the logs are floated down the Cumberland River to Nashville, where their sawmills are built on the eastern side of the river. They have a lot of waste, they have a lot of dust, and so these logs were floated down the river, and sawmills began to be built over there. Then along come other industries as of the same ilk over there, and although we had steamboats docking here at the end of Broadway and further down, there were not steamboats docking on the eastern side of the Cumberland River. And so that's how that area began to develop. Now, meanwhile, a little bit further back on the east bank of the Cumberland River, you see Nashville's first real suburb, and it was Edgefield. And it became the place where a lot of very wealthy people lived. They had beautiful, magnificent Victorian homes over there, away from the east bank of the river. And so the homes that were built over there, the ones that still remain, are quite elegant. And yet, as the industries began to die out after World War II, and they were no longer in need of that, the homes over there began to be sold, and this and that and the other, and everybody suddenly wanted to move to the next hot place, which was West Nashville. And so here you see what the development is over there today on this map. Here you see what it was like in 1877 with all of those steam towers there, bringing steam and soot, pollution, into the air there. And so the question is, what is it going to be today? Edgefield, all the way to the river, incorporated very briefly in 1877, but just a little while later, about 1790, it was annexed by the city of Nashville at its request. So this is a brief look at the history of what happened on the eastern side of the river, the East Bank. And now I think it's a great opportunity, now that Edgefield and East Nashville are really thriving. You've got a great opportunity before you to think about what this area that's been underutilized could possibly be. I think you've got a handout from me. It has some information on the very last page about how to contact me. I'm happy to answer any questions by email or talk to you on the phone or your neighborhood group. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Busey, for providing that historic overview. One thing, as our Director Kempf and our planning staff are moving up, one thing I'll kind of add is that the East Nashville community in particular has been very interested in redeveloping the East Bank for a long time, and took steps toward that end, working with MDHA to create the East Bank Redevelopment District. That came out of discussions that had happened in the 80s and the early 90s, and then the East Bank Redevelopment District was enacted by council in 1996. And then a few years later, sort of to Dr. Busey's point, you had a lot of disinvestment and blight that had happened along the Main and Woodland corridors. And so that is a reason why a few years later, the East Bank Redevelopment District boundaries were expanded to go down to 5 Points, where the 5 Points Redevelopment District itself had been created a few years earlier. But so there has been, both from the neighborhood association side as well as from the city of Nashville and MDHA, there has been an effort to try to spur redevelopment on the East Bank for a couple of decades now. To my recollection, the only new buildings that have been constructed were the Gerst House, when they built a new building, which is now demolished. And then the second new building on the East Bank was the new La Quinta. So redevelopment efforts for for the East Bank have not necessarily been successful in that regard. For the East Bank planning study, which I know Director Kemp is going to go through, one of the things that when Councilmember Parker and I had our kickoff meeting, one of the things that we kind of went through is a little bit of that history. We've also had the Civic Design Center, when they worked on the plan of Nashville, had some neat ideas for what to do about the East Bank. We've had a riverfront master plan that was done a few years ago, but so far, not a whole lot has really happened on the East Bank in terms of seeing improvements. But from that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Director Lucy Kempf and her team to talk about the latest phase of that, which we hope is more successful, which is the East Bank planning study.
Thank you, Councilman Withers and Councilwoman Allen, for inviting me here today. And to Dr. Busey, thank you for your presentation. Whenever we're talking about transformation at a scale that we're discussing with the East Bank, I always think rooting our thinking in a historical context is really important. And so we thought that sort of hearing about the evolution of the space, how it has functioned in our city over time, has helped us to think through the kinds of uses that might be appropriate here and how they can feel sort of authentic to our city. So I'm here to give you an overview of the CIB items that we submitted several weeks ago, but to give you a better context, we want to give you a very brief overview of the East Bank planning study itself. And so before we dive into that, just a bit of context here. Can y'all see my... There we go. So just over a year ago, Oracle announced that it would build a $1.2 billion investment in our city just north of the East Bank study area, which is shown here in yellow. We have other residential development situated between Oracle and the East Bank. Casey Place over here, as many of you know, are under redevelopment. There's a lot of work happening on Dickerson Pike in Councilman Parker's district, and many of these investments were anticipated. We, of course, did not anticipate the 2nd Avenue revitalization work that occurred after the bombing there a year ago, but all of this development that is encircling the East Bank really sent us a strong message and suggested to us that we needed to think very critically about the East Bank and its future. I think when you have development that is occurring the way that it is in this area, the potential for piecemeal development is very real. And when development is piecemealed, it is difficult to accomplish strong community vision that guides that work, particularly in a multimodal context. Many of you know we're trying to build bikeways and sidewalks in your neighborhood and retrofitting your neighborhoods with parks and the like. We have an opportunity here to build in and guide and govern our view of the East Bank as we grow, and it is a much more straightforward proposition when you do that. And so really, I think, you know, as I've thought about this study, I've learned a number of really important things, and one of those is that while our planning efforts certainly focused on this East Bank area, this 335 acres, this is where we started our work, this is where we have focused, I think the vision and the opportunity is actually much, much bigger than that. And it is about connecting people to one another through greenways, through bikeways, through special places that are unique to who we are, such as the river. And you heard that historic context from Dr. Busey. And so what does that look like to be a more interconnected, interrelated, connected Nashville? And I think the East Bank has a real opportunity to do that within the study area boundaries, but also as a platform for connectivity elsewhere, for the enjoyment of all Nashvillians. That's why we're here. And so what does a more connected Nashville really look like? Well, it needs to happen on a couple of different scales. And so every planning project, no matter how small or big, needs to respond to a broader regional planning network. And that's what you see here. These dotted lines represent existing major corridors that were highlighted in the 2020 transportation plan that this body approved. And so we wanted to better understand, how does the East Bank function within the study area, but how does it also connect elsewhere? And you can see here on the very heavily dashed lines from Whites Creek Pike down to Murfreesboro, that the East Bank really is a linchpin where a number of these networks meet. And so what does it mean to create a higher level of multimodal functionality and equitable access in these networks? And so that's one of the standards that we used as we thought about our planning work. And it's something that we'll do for every major project anywhere in the county in the future, is understand how it connects to this broader network. I do want to note, you see these lines here are a little less bolded. This is an area that we go and NDOT are exploring as part of the Connect Nashville plan. And so essentially, I would anticipate in the coming months having a fully integrated vision here for how our planning work can better meet our multimodal goals. This has been one of the most robust planning processes that we've undertaken since Nashville Next, and you can see some of the highlights here below about the work that we've done. Some of this was done during the height of COVID, where we were trying to understand how to meet both in person as well as remotely, and we worked really hard to kind of reach the comfort levels of all of the attendees. And I want to thank Councilman Parker and Councilman Withers for helping us put together a neighborhood advisory committee that gave us feedback throughout, and I would anticipate will remain involved. And so it's just been really exceptional to see the level of investment of so many neighborhoods in this effort. So throughout the planning study, I have to say this doesn't always happen. Sometimes public sentiment changes over time, but I would say that there are 4 primary areas where we received major comments about the East Bank, and it continued throughout the planning process. So the first is that we are looking for safe and simple connections. Feedback included equitable multimodal opportunities, emphasis on pedestrian and bicycle safety, a need for north-south connectivity, which we'll talk through in a moment, and then also better connectivity to surrounding neighborhoods. It's really hard because this area was described often as sort of leftover, forgotten space, but yet it does have a NFL stadium on it, so it can't really be leftover, but somehow it is. And it's interesting because when I meet with many of your constituencies about planning in your neighborhoods, often there's a very, very strong sense of neighborhood identity. And I would say in this instance, people really struggled sometimes to find the words, and I think you heard from Dr. Busey why. And a lot of it has to do with the lack of connectivity. I think the lack of comfort in pedestrians being even comfortable moving about the area. A second is equity and affordability. We hear this in every project that we're doing. This includes access to jobs, affordability, a desire for housing, and the like. Neighborhoods for Nashvillians, I would describe this as ensuring that the type of development that we see is not just for tourists, but it's actually for local families. And that's something that I think we have to work through in a lot of different levels, right? And it's not just a planning question, but it's about our economy. It's about the types of uses that we incorporate. It's the look and feel of the neighborhood. And so, but that's something that's very important. And then, of course, respect for the river. This includes a respect and acknowledgement for resiliency planning. We have an opportunity here to do an outstanding sort of resilient project that is a showcase for how we can do resiliency planning in the future, but also for the enjoyment of the river in a different way. You heard a comment about folks used to boat, and I think, we had a lot of conversations with boaters and how that might work at this location, and then can you access other neighborhoods that are located on the river? What might that look like? And so we're trying to seed a number of ideas here that we think could expand out into other neighborhoods that are on the river and may have interest. At no time At no time did we receive feedback that the East Bank today is of value to the community. I never heard anyone say, we really love this. And this is an aerial view looking south of the East Bank today, and it shows the character of probably some of the most underutilized land that we have in our city's core, maybe the most underutilized land of a core of any peer city. And so we do have a once-in-a-generational opportunity to create a great neighborhood here, but also to bring this area to life in a platform that can serve both local, and when I say local, I mean site, but also neighborhood and regional needs, which we'll talk about in a moment. The vital signs for this area are not great. There are some bright points. The bridge building, for example, we have Cumberland Park. 127 acres of parking lots and other pavement is nothing to really be excited about. We think that this area can perform much better for our community. Again, there are some bright spots. We've invested in the park, and I think we just need to build on that. So this image is an illustration. It is not a design plan, but I'm a visual person, and I wonder if many of you are, and it's a way of illustrating the types of feedback that we received about sort of major building blocks needed to support neighborhoods. And a lot of these are things that you just sort of take for granted, like pedestrian, sidewalks, or, streets for buses, or a greenway. That does not exist here. So you sort of have to meet the area where it is. You will see in this that the Titan Stadium is still located in its current place. I wouldn't overthink that. The point of this slide is going to be that wherever the stadium is placed, we can accomplish planning goals and meet the basic and essential needs from the CIB perspective that are needed to support a diverse neighborhood like this. And so we heard from the community and believe that bikeways and greenways are important. An activated riverfront is important. Multimodal boulevard, residential streets, neighborhood parks, transit-oriented development, which we'll talk about in just a moment, a diversity of housing types. That's something that we heard over and over again from the community that they wanted to see in this area, and then green streets and resilient landscapes. And so again, this is not meant to be a plan for you to review. We don't have a plan to submit today. It's more of a visual representation to better understand the kinds of investments that we are proposing in the CIB that we believe are necessary to transform this area into a more productive part of our city. So how do you go from a development type on the left to something that is a little more consistent with the right? Well, so the infrastructure there today is auto-oriented, and it supports low-scale manufacturing and distribution. And so the CIB requests that we have submitted are essentially the kinds of building blocks that would be needed if we wanted to evolve this area into something that is a little more diverse, that supports housing and the like. So it's worth mentioning here that the CIB is a planning tool, and we wanted to very transparently sort of submit the kinds of investments, the resources and methods that we think would be necessary in the future to see this area develop over time. Again, I'll say we don't have a project to submit to you. When we do have a project to submit, you will have a lot more detail about what the investment is, its purpose, and the like. But given the scope of change and the scope of work over here, we think that this warrants a very kind of holistic view to ensure that everybody, both elected officials and residents, but also the Metro departments, understand the type of investment that we think would be necessary over time. And so a summary slide on this is Basically, we believe to really uncover this area's potential, and you've heard that we've tried for many decades to bring this area to life, that there's two real things to do from a planning perspective. Invest in those foundational building blocks, which is represented in the CIB request, and then ensure that this neighborhood promotes and participates in both the local and the regional goals for resiliency, for mobility, for housing services, high quality urban design, and the like. So there are a couple of really core obstacles. I'm paid to be unhappy sometimes and to talk about all the problems before you can get to a good spot. And there are some existing barriers here that are very important to talk about. And so the staff didn't really want to do squiggly lines because they're not pretty. Well, the truth is we have barriers that are tough to deal with. So on the right side, you see I-24. We talked a bit about the interstate system. The river itself is a barrier, even though when we worked on the 2nd Avenue recovery effort, one thing we heard from so many residents is, let's the river not be a barrier anymore. We have a city that has a river between it, and we can engage. We also have interior obstacles. See, these arrows aren't conceptual. This is actually what the street grid looks like today. So it's a very disjointed street grid. And so to really bring this area alive and help this patient, we will need to address both these barriers and the interior. And so I'm so glad that Paul Deggs is here today, because we knew initially as we embarked on this study that we at planning and at Metro would not be able to address these barriers alone. And so we reached out to TDOT and asked them to evaluate their circulation system here, to look at the access points, the interchange systems, and also to help us understand the bridges and their lifespan and what TDOT might consider in terms of replacing bridges in the future when they sort of were up on the project schedule. TDOT has been a really great partner, has been at the table solving some of these questions and giving us that good technical feedback. And so that's something that's really important for us to continue that partnership. So we can't rely on TDOT alone, although we do think some of the improvements that we've submitted for the CIB are good candidates for local, state, and federal funding opportunities that would be outside of the traditional CIB process because of its location, because of the placement near the interstate, and a whole host of other reasons that I'm sure Director Alicon could help us with. But we want to go from this jagged, interior, disconnected network to something that is a more cohesive plan that you would see consistent in most neighborhoods in the city, whether they're low or high scale. And so one point I want to make here, you'll see the projects over near Oracle or the resources. I thought it was really important to show you that we're building a network, a community. And so we're showing you some network slides, but the Oracle improvements are part of a separate agreement. They are not in the CIB, but we need to make sure that we connect to them to ensure we have a cohesive and thoughtful system so that we are able to serve those multimodal goals that I think are required for this area to be successful. So this category includes development for infrastructure, utilities, environmental remediation, a transit hub, and parking. So it is this is a workhorse category here. And again, we're not bringing a proposal to you at this point where we want to take a first step in laying out how to accomplish this vision. And so that's really the purpose of the CIB request, to help get us into an organized planning process where we talk about the kinds of needs that we think are important here. Having an equitable access to not only the East Bank, but also parts of downtown where we have a lot of goods and services is something that we heard about over and over again. And so we wanted to seed our planning work in not only the transportation plan that this body approved, but also in WeGo's work. And so if you look here, you'll see the existing high-frequency bus services. We believe that we need to invest heavily in this area in transit. This is another workhorse item here. And so what we're recommending is a multimodal north-south route that will at this point be designed to support pedestrian access, multimodal transit, and the like. We don't want to have to come back and retrofit an existing street to support transit like we're having to do all over the county. We want to do it right the first time with the land use. And so that's what's proposed here, and you see how it's seated with the existing multimodal network. One of the other questions that we have been pursuing, and it goes back to that first slide, how do you ensure that the work that we are pursuing meaningfully connects to neighborhoods and other high-capacity transit routes, whether you're connecting to North Dickerson Road over to West Trinity or down to Murfreesboro, where we have a lot of growth in this county. And so we have proposed a RAISE grant, which you approved, I think, a month ago, Diana, a little more than a month ago, to help us explore the southern extents of this network. Because again, we should not plan in a vacuum. We should not plan segment by segment. The overall vision for us here must be something that is connecting Nashvillians to one another, a more connected city. I want to acknowledge on the northern end that we already have work from TDOT to connect this segment, which is part of the Oracle project, over to Cleveland and to the north along Dickerson. So we have solved some of those northern extent questions. We now need to bring that same level of focus through the RAISE grant, and I really look forward to working with Steve Bland and his team and NDOT to really better understand how all of this can work together. But this is another workhorse, long-term investment opportunity that we need to phase and unpack. So part of that same category is ensuring that at the forefront we are providing for bike and pedestrian facilities as we plan. We have learned that building them in later is really difficult. And Councilman, I'm so glad that you are okay. And I thought about you when I was putting this slide in here. And, you know, in my mind, there are two standards that we need to meet here on the planning side. One is to reassure this body that we are looking at this from a network perspective. And then the other is to ensure that we are designing these places for your protection. And so on the network perspective, what we are proposing, again, I'm showing Oracle, so you have a good understanding of how these facilities work together. But we are proposing an integrated bike network that has some duplication. We think that's really important. We've learned that from our experiences in downtown and in other parts of the city where there are lots and lots of users for these facilities. And so we want to make sure that this is built out, and we are pursuing design standards that get it right on the front end. So if we don't get the bike facilities correct, this project will not succeed. And so I'm really committed to getting that done. And so this network is part of this number 3 piece. We have the same approach with Greenways. I hope everyone can see. We need magnifying glasses. We need to embolden these. Okay, I'm sorry, folks, forgive me. So what you've got here are planned greenways, and then you've got some existing greenways, and we are envisioning a more complete system, because greenways are an incredible part of our city fabric, and we are growing these in a way that I think are unique to all the neighborhoods in which they're being built, which is very cool and much cool. I hope we don't have any Atlanta folks in here, but I think it's cooler than what's going on in Atlanta. So what we've gone ahead and done is proposed planning around the East Bank Greenways, which are highlighted here in blue. And these aren't just, well, yes, we want them by the river. We think it's really important that they also begin to engage other park systems near McFerrin and the like, so people can access these spaces without jumping in a car. These would connect to the Oracle. I don't know if you saw that. So the Oracle is in yellow here. This is part of that project. And then, of course, we have the bridge, which will get us access over to this Greenway network. And then eventually, as we continue to pursue connectivity to the south, the idea of connecting here in a completely different part of our city, I think, is something that we would like to pursue. This wouldn't happen overnight. This is something that needs to be scaled and phased over time, but it is accomplishable if it's something that we think that our neighborhoods and communities would welcome. And I have to say that while we've done lots and lots of community engagement for this piece here in yellow and here, these sort of southern extents and northern extents, we'd welcome the opportunity to come and speak and work with your neighborhoods to talk about what that might look like. So there's a lot of work to be done here, but we wanted to give you a sense of the scope of the opportunity for bringing together a more connected city for people. You know, Councilwoman, I'm thinking about you have this wonderful, I'm talking to Councilwoman Van Rees, trail-oriented development in your district, and you said to me the first time that we sat down and talked about it, I love this, but it's really interior to this site, and how would we get this back over to Madison? And so I think really thinking in those terms is how we build out a network. So I have a bad habit of just starting conversations with council members when I'm presenting, but you gotta talk to people. It's really exciting. Okay. So another resource that we heard from the community that is of interest that just needs to be developed at this point, obviously this isn't design, it's not a circle, has to do with parks planning. We are looking very carefully at the resiliency needs of the East Bank. This is an area that's vulnerable to flooding. And so understanding how our park system and our water systems can work together for safety, but also for the enjoyment of people is really important. And so we have planning and design in the CIB, but again, we're not near construction. This is really me saying to you, we think this is an area that warrants and demands some future investigation. Affordable housing is one of sort of the most frequent, if not the most frequent, comment that we received during our planning work thus far. And so one of the things, this is a very colorful map, but one of the things that we wanted to better understand is we know there are no housing units on the East Bank itself, but how is the neighborhood around it contributing to our affordable housing needs and just generally our housing needs in the city. And we think that the East Bank is presenting a really rare opportunity to build housing in our city. We want to do it in a way that is safe. And when I say safe, I mean two ways. One, from a resiliency perspective, ensuring we're not building housing in and around floodplains, and two, ensuring we have equitable multimodal access to serve that housing. I took that standard very seriously. I know a lot of folks wanted me to come right out and say, we're doing housing here, but what I want to say to this body is housing requires fair access, it requires good mobility networks, and we have to make sure we have that framework built in before coming in and proposing specifics around housing. We want to create housing opportunities to scale, to equitably meet long-term need. And I've got Angie Hubbard, I apologize, Angie Hubbard here, Director of Housing, who can talk with you a little bit about the kinds of ideas that are of interest to us on the East Bank. As infrastructure, as we have a better understanding of the infrastructure investment here, I think the housing picture will become much clearer. We've proposed $4 million right now for planning and leveraging. I anticipate that to become much larger. that's a starting point for how we want to think about it. And so we want to focus on specific sites as we move forward and what sites are most appropriate for housing. And Angie, I realized when I said hello to you that I failed to introduce the rest of the team, which was super tacky. Anna Greider is here and has been managing this process. I'm not on my last slide, so I feel like I've gotten in there before. And then Rochelle Albright, who is our great communications director. And so anyway, I'm so grateful for your listening tonight, and I'm looking forward to your questions. This is a tough project, but it's one that we need your guidance and feedback on. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. And with that, I will just say thanks again for having us. And Councilman?
Well, thank you so much for
Am I
that.
done? Okay.
That great presentation.
Okay.
Director Alarcon, do you have anything that you wanted to present, or are folks ready to go more into Q&A?
I'm more here for support and Q&A.
That's fantastic. Do any of the other departments that we've invited have anything that you want to share up front? Otherwise, I really look forward to the questions that my colleagues might ask, and I really especially appreciate Mr. Diggs for joining us today, because I know the collaboration with TDOT is so important. I think in the District 5 side of the East Bank Planning Study, we're working with TDOT for looking at potential right-of-way acquisition to create that spine street, and we appreciate TDOT for working with us on that. I know that all of everyone who tries to enter or exit downtown from the east side will be excited about realigning the interstates in some way that is safe even for people just in cars. Right now it doesn't feel safe, much less if you're on a bike or on foot. So that is a really exciting thing too, and I want to make sure that we take advantage of the gift of time that you've given us today. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions. So I think I've got Councilmember Dreffel first, and you are not at your desk. You are at...
Slides. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Sheriff. Do you have a time frame and the total cost? I haven't had a chance to take a look at it. I mean, one of the obstacles I think my district has is we can't get a sidewalk delivered in our district. And so, you know, when my constituents see this, they go, really? You know, when you're going to build this much in someplace else? It's sorely needed. It's beautiful. I love it. But the reality is a lot of our districts need some infrastructure. And so I think we got to really address that. If I can't get a sidewalk, I can't get the 7100 interchange solved when there's an accident every 2 weeks, then we see this kind of stuff. And I think this is where some of our constituents start to get disconnected to where we're going. So any thoughts on how this is going to work?
I'm happy to offer the planning comment, and then I would maybe ask Director Alarcon to help understand sort of how she would balance those priorities. What I would say is at this point, the CIB is a planning document, and it is incumbent on me after doing planning study, and I'll do this wherever we're working in the future, to ensure that we list the capital needs in a way that's clear and that meets the need of that area. So it's not a capital request, it's not a project request. And so I assume that when the spending plan comes forward and Director Alarcon and the mayor's office and others are looking at the balance and the totality of needs, that they will adequately look at the existing neighborhoods, the needs there, the utility of those sidewalks or those bus stops or whatever it is that is a need, and you've expressed that in a strong way, and help balance out how that sort of fits within a budget. We're not really at a budget point yet, and so that's how I would answer that question. But Director, did you?
No, sorry. That was well done. From a timing perspective or a scheduling perspective, we did put in for a raise grant through the U.S. Department of Transportation. We're anticipating to hear about that grant probably late July, early August. And that's a planning grant, and that's the first step of this. So it's really hard for me to say when I'm going to and how I'm going to build out the boulevard. I have to go through that planning process because we are looking to the federal government as well as the state to continue to be partners within this to build out this infrastructure. So that planning grant, we would actually look at kicking off this year. That's approximately an 18 to 24-month planning process that will include also a lot of community engagement that we need to be doing, really understanding the environmental and social justice impacts that will be happening along the corridor, and then looking at what is the most feasible way to move forward. And that's the next step of that. We'd be designing on how we would proceed forward. That would lead to a more robust schedule that we would be able to provide. So I would say in the next 18 to 24 months, it's really going to be focusing on that planning to engineering design to get to that cost estimate of what that looks and feels like. As to your question about the sidewalk or raising the sidewalk, I'm not disagreeing, sir, that it's taking us a little bit of time to get a lot of these sidewalk projects that we have, but we do have many sidewalk projects that are on the plans that will be jumping off. We just finalized our contract with 3 different vendors to actually go and start building out the sidewalks this past week. So that is going to allow us to be much more robust in getting our sidewalk program up and moving. We have a lot of programs that are actually in design. We're ready to go build. We just had to get through the procurement process of getting the contractor on to go do it. So I think over the summer and moving into the fall, y'all are going to see a lot of sidewalks being built throughout the community. I can verify if the one particular you're concerned with is actually on the list, but we are aggressively trying to put that out there, understanding that need is there today.
Yeah, I just, it's not even just my district.
It's everywhere.
I mean, we hear it from a lot of districts. They're all looking at like, okay, this is another downtown project. And it's beautiful. But again, and that side of the river is absolutely needed. It's just a matter of, I think there's going to have to be some give back and some prioritization in some of these districts. Otherwise, I know my constituents are already, they're looking at Titan Stadium, they're looking at all these things. And they're already, I mean, my phones are buzzing. So I think it's really important that they start to see something creep back into the neighborhood, if that makes sense.
I agree with you 100%, sir. And I think y'all will start seeing that again as we jump into the summer and into the fall. I think you're going to see a lot of that development start happening. And a lot of those improvements throughout the entire Davidson County.
I see Councilmember Mendez and then Parker and then Gamble. So go ahead.
Thanks, chairs. I want to say first thanks to everybody, Dr. Busey, the gentleman from TDOT, and everybody in the Metro Department's been working on these projects. You guys have been working really hard, and as far as I can tell, it's world-class planning going on. I do want to object a little bit to the premise of the meeting that this is allegedly non-stadium related, and we're not going to talk about that. And since we had 15 minutes of antebellum history that wasn't on an agenda, which I love, but I'm going to take a little liberty from the agenda. And welcome, Mr. Mayor, joined us. I was about to reference a quote of yours in the Tennessean in January. The public posture of the administration as recently as just a couple months ago was that in order to get a stadium that doesn't cost the general taxpayer, we have to build a neighborhood. It was a then we have to build Nashville's next great neighborhood, I think is the quote, with a then after it. And that's clearly been the premise until the talking point shifted about a month ago to say, oh, no, like neighborhood stadium, totally different. As far as the CIB goes, like everything that's on the list, put it in the CIB, totally in favor of it being in the CIB, but we definitely wouldn't need like every department head and half of Metro's brain power in the room to get the stuff in the CIB. That's not what this is about. This is about laying the groundwork for the stadium discussion that's coming a month or two down the road. And that's fine, I get it, but I think that needs to be said directly and not pretend that this is about whether we should put stuff in the CIB or not. You guys have done awesome work in doing the planning, and all of it should be in the CIB, even though it adds up to $734 million and is $750 million. And as Councilman Druffel mentioned, every neighborhood in the city would take the deal of keeping 50% of sales tax from 130 acres local and half the property tax local to develop their neighborhood. Every neighborhood in the city would take that deal. we're going to have that conversation about whether that's good or bad, but there's a little bit of a premise drift here that this isn't about the stadium, and then, but CIB, 2 thumbs up. Let's do it. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Director Kemp, do you have any additional background to give about the East Bank planning study and what it was, or
Well,
what was the genesis of that?
I would, from the planning side, I would just respectfully push back and say that what we want to accomplish here is a holistic vision for a really grossly underserved, when I say underserved, I mean from a planning perspective, part of our city. And the first time I became really concerned actually about the East Bank, and I think I've shared this with you, Councilman, was when I got a site plan for the truck stop site, which is 17 acres north of the stadium, and it was designed with a lot of intensity. And by the way, the East Bank is zoned for a lot of intensity, and it was going to be served with cul-de-sacs. And I realized, I called Councilman Parker and I said, you know, Houston, we have a problem. And really, when you look at the overall mobility network, and I'll go back to that third slide, the animations are so pretty until you want to kind of get somewhere fast. And essentially say that we have 350 acres over here that are a linchpin for a lot of mobility networks that we have been pursuing for decades to try to understand how to move people throughout the city in a way that is more equitable and that is out of their car. And so I look at the East Bank very differently from that, and I measure it against the planning principles that say an investment in a bike must look like this, an investment in a park or an investment in a multimodal boulevard or network must look like this, and get feedback from residents on that point. And so that is the earnestness with which I present this plan. I can't speak to your comments about the stadium, but this plan, in my mind, has been a work in progress. I mean, when we approved Oracle, there were networks that needed to be extended. There were networks that needed to engage the rest of our community's urban design framework, the fabric of this city. And so I just put that on the table from my perspective.
I appreciate that, and don't, you know, I don't question the earnestness with where planning is coming from and all the other departments involved here. But to go to Councilman Druffel's point, if this wasn't about the stadium and we had $750 million laying around, like we'd all be a lot more popular if we fixed the Highway 70-100 split and we're Blue Hole and Una Antioch, Pike, Snarl, and so Councilman Bradford's residents don't have to wait a half hour to get on the interstate at Donaldson Pike. We'd all be a lot more popular if we spent $750 million doing those things. And again, like the planning work appears to be super duper top notch, beyond anything I could ever reasonably expect, and love it. But just the premise of the meeting that it's absolutely positively not about the stadium, I'm pushing back on that.
And Councilman, if I can clarify, I mean, part of it for me is that the East Bank planning study was originally contemplating having the stadium being in one location. Whether it stays in that location or goes to another one, planning can work around it either way. The East Bank planning study has been underway with our community groups for quite a long time, with a lot of engagement, regardless of the stadium question. And the
Chair,
CIB,
I understand your point, Chair,
but discussion today is about the infrastructure upgrades that we hope to bring to solve problems for the region, and not about the financing of the stadium, which will be a topic of a lot of great discussion in the future.
Chair, respectfully, there's a 0% chance of this county supporting a $750 million investment on the East Bank if the stadium wasn't involved. A 0% chance.
Thank you for that comment. Next, I'm going to go to District 5, Councilmember Sean Parker.
Thank Thank you, chairs. So thank you all again for the presentation. That's a lot of new stuff to me. Very cool to see. Especially excited about the Greenway connection along Ellington. We've been sort of hinting at that and talking about that for a very long time. But I did want to kind of circle back to, I think that there's two big questions that the public are going to have about this. And I think that Councilman Truffle highlighted the first one, which is how come you're not doing this in my neighborhood? And then the second one, I think, is so we're building this phenomenal foundation, right? We're laying the groundwork for quality development and a quality neighborhood to emerge, but people want to know how it's going to be programmed. People want to know, what are we getting here? And as you said, the sort of four big pillars, two of them, equity and affordability, and a neighborhood for Nashvillians. So, I think that we're going to need to communicate to people how this is going to be programmed. I mean, I foresee tension between those priorities, so affordable housing, say, and a public amenity like a library that folks, there's a library close to here, but it's a very small library. And so this would be a great place to put another, maybe not quite as big as the 615 Church Street, but, another library would be phenomenal here. But, I think there is, there's, without getting into specifics, there's likely to be an engine cranked up in this area that's going to hoover up all the sales revenue. There's going to be pressure to generate sales revenue. And those things, I worry how we're going to balance those sort of public priorities of affordable housing, libraries, et cetera, that are not going to contribute to that sales revenue. And it's just something that I want us to be aware of through this process as we program specifically the publicly controlled parts of this area. And I don't know, do you are y'all to the point of thinking through that, or how do you, when people say, okay, great, foundation, what's going to go there? What can we, because it's just a tremendous amount of money, so people are going to want to know what's there. Is it going to be more 6-story honky-tonks, driving beer, alcohol sales, We're hoping, I think that's universally, I think we've got a big slice of that, and it's tremendous, and it's a lot of fun, and I think folks feel like we don't want to over-egg that omelet.
I like that. I can over-egg that. Bar that. I'm like, over-egg that omelet.
Or, like a pedal tavern transit hub. I think we don't.
Please don't. Please, let's not put that. That's bad.
I'm sorry, but
Councilman.
That's sort of, I think, the concern that a lot of people have when we see this potential sales revenue sort of feedback loop with the planning and the programming of the site. So yeah. I don't know. I mean, what can we tell people is going to go here? We have to tell them something. It's $750 million.
Aside from the honky tonk, that scared me. I hope we don't have honky tonk vehicles over here. That's not the vision for this area.
The vision for many areas.
Thank you, Director Alcon. That's not the vision for many areas. 350 acres just for the East Bank itself, and then if you think about the neighborhoods that are developing to the north and to the south and east, is a lot of property to develop over time, and it's not all going to happen at once. Great neighborhoods, as you know, you have so many in your district, develop organically and over time. I think a platform of having housing is a really important foundational piece of this, because when people live in a neighborhood, it feels better and it works better. You have users there who are walking and maybe biking to work. You have other kinds of uses. I think you raise the point that maybe we'll have a different level of control about uses in the metro-owned property than we might in the privately owned property. I would reassure you there and say a lot of the existing zoning, that you have something to say about that, is mixed uses. Right? And we see that kind of development and that interest in this area. We have to provide great addresses for them to go. And so I think, I'd be a little more concerned if we had a different type of zoning profile here in a lot of this area, but we don't. And so I think by providing the kinds of investments that we're talking about, we'll get we'll get uses that are diverse and the like. I was talking to Councilman Withers about how you support locally owned businesses, for example, because I know that that's an interest, getting a daycare. I mean, what I want to hear from the community are those specific amenities that they think are necessary. You saying a library here or some kind of a gathering space is important. And so when we release the vision document and get more of that feedback, I think that can help us craft how we want the area to develop over time. So I'm looking forward to working with you on how to talk about that.
Thank you, Director Kempf. I want to, again, recognize that Mayor Cooper's here and his administration. I don't want to get a whole lot into the financing piece, but just wanted to give an opportunity if Mayor Cooper or the administration would like to speak a little bit about how you envision working with the present and future council bodies to resolve some of those competing interests, I guess I would say.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. It's great to be back with all of my colleagues, and I'm grateful for the discussion. We all want to hear it. This is what engagement looks like. I did come up in part to thank TDOT for being here. When I was a council member, we never had TDOT here, okay? And I want to celebrate a little bit Diana and NDOT's relationship with TDOT, and to thank the state for being here and being fundamental to working through our problems. And to recognize that TDOT is a great source of money for us, and the Biden administration, frankly, is a great source of money for us. And to recognize the opportunity of working with our state and federal partners to use money that otherwise would go, frankly, to other states or other cities, to be able to use here, possibly, but only with great plans, right? And to use the moment of the Biden money and the state money to serve all those neighborhoods that are in that map. And whether we had a stadium or not, or this stadium or another stadium, you have Oracle, and you have 350 acres, you have the truck stop, and you have this long-held ability to reconnect neighborhoods that have been blocked by I-24, and the ability not to use I-24 or 40 always for local transportation because there was no other option. Is there another option as we grow as a city? And that's why I'm grateful to TDOT to be able to be here and to recognize, is this a good option for the whole county? How else are we going to fix I-24 and 40 unless you build capacity? And this kind of capacity with a common vision. And so I'm excited. I'm excited for a lot of things. I'm excited for Nashville, but I'm excited to be able to present maybe to the public something that does fix 40 and I-24 and serves all those neighborhoods on that graphic in a way that is whether you never touched the old stadium, because of Oracle and the East Bank, you were given the opportunity. Now we can all, I think this council and this body recognizing, is this an opportunity to go forward? That's an exciting moment. Wasn't an option presented to us before. I'm grateful to the Biden administration funding to be able to be there. I'm grateful to TDOT and NDOT's, I believe, excellent working relationship with planning, and this is why we're here, to engage, is this level of opportunity. But just right now, I do worry about 40 and 24 being broken. I worry about people from Donaldson not being able to work at Oracle without having to go downtown and cross back over the KVV bridge. Right, that the economic opportunity represented by the jobs in the East Bank, I think, needs to serve our neighborhoods. And if the occasion of Oracle is giving us another tunnel underneath I-24 to connect into neighborhoods, that seems like an opportunity. But again, I'm up here to thank Paul, because were you ever here in the previous, not that you weren't invited, but I'm grateful that you're here. I'm grateful that you're here with Lucy and Diana and everybody else going forward to be part of our discussion as an entire council about solving problems. about making a city that works. We're going to grow. Are we going to grow with investment in the right way? And with that, again, I'm just kind of happy to be here. And I know Bob kept my chair. That's what I really want, is my chair downstairs in that old desk, and to work together as everybody, as partners in this additional challenge of the city. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you so much, Mayor Cooper. I'm going to next turn it over to Councilmember Campbell.
Thank you. Thank you, chairs, and thank you all for being here and for the great presentation. It looks like a lot of thought and community engagement went into that, which is very important. While I've been in Nashville over 30 years, I think many of you know that I'm from Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, and so I appreciate we have the Chicago River that kind of goes through the city and separates the north and south side of the city, flows into Lake Michigan. And on the south side of the river, where there's more the skyscrapers, more office buildings, but then on the north side we have the Merchandise Mart and more of a retail district that blends into the neighborhood. So wondered if there was any thought about having a kind of a retail area, which would bring in sales tax, a district as a part of that East Bank development. I can appreciate the East Bank development, even though it's not in my area. I do have questions, though, about the bridge, and the bridge that you mentioned that would connect to Germantown, I guess it is. Is that planned for a pedestrian bikeway, Greenway bridge, similar to the bridge in Donaldson, Opryland area? And are there any plans or discussions for a multimodal bridge north of there? We're looking at West Trinity Lane connecting the northern part of the Cumberland River to downtown, to Metro Center, to areas that's where we don't have to always use I-24. So if you can speak to that, thank you.
I really like all of those ideas. First, on the retail, it's incredibly important. It's an incredibly important for a thriving neighborhood, and so yes, I know that's something that's of interest to. We've talked to every property owner on the East Bank, and many of them talk about the importance of the retail presence and the pedestrian experience. It's so important, and to your point, it's a part of our economy. It's also part of how the neighborhood feels, and so we think that's great. I'm really looking forward to the work on West Trinity and better understanding sort of the relationship of those developments to the river. The question you asked about oracles, or forgive me, the bridge to Germantown is for bicyclists and pedestrians, which is a really great opportunity because we are working to connect that with another investment from TDOT over Gray Street, which would get us up to Dickerson, which is a great and complete network to provide for safe access. I think the opportunity for additional multimodal crossings on the river is something that TDOT will be looking at. Yep, as the city evolves, we have to continue to work with our partners at TDOT, but in other neighborhoods that are situated on the waterfront, where, to your point, you're having to jump on an interstate to go up, a quarter of a mile, it doesn't make any sense. And so we absolutely want to bring these kinds of ideas to those areas and work with the community on that. Director, did you want to add anything?
I think you answered it perfect.
Oh, okay.
All right.
We'd like to hear that.
Thank you. I do appreciate those questions. Those are great. Next, I have Councilmember Swope and then Councilmember Young.
Chair, thank you, Director Kemp, for being here, Director Alicorn, and thank you, Paul. Very much appreciated. You and I had this conversation not too long ago about we all need to work together more. I noticed on your little picture right there that the current PCS Metals property has mixed-use residential built on it.
We can dream. This is a vision document.
Okay, I'm just saying that the estimated remediation cost of that particular piece of ground could very well exceed $1 billion, as we all know.
This is an illustration to talk about the building blocks that would be necessary to support a different neighborhood.
So with that said, and with this understanding that these are building blocks, I revert back to a conversation that Director Bland and I have had for years now, which is if you look at an overall map of Nashville and threw a dart at it for the number one place to have a Music City Central Transit Center, it would be the PCS Metals property. And it would also reduce remediation because you could cap the whole thing and put a transit center on it. Has that been given any serious consideration within these building blocks?
I'll take that one. Yes, sir. It is. So in the conversations that we're having, and again, please understand the raise grant is really going to be that starting point, and that's going to be toward the end of the July, beginning of August. But we have identified a placeholder in that area for a mobility center. Sorry, Steve. I like to call them mobility center, not transit center. So yes, we are identifying that as a potential area for one.
Good, because where it currently sits is probably the single worst place in the entire county you could put it. Anyway, that's all I got. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Swope. I'll next recognize Councilmember Young.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. They were suggesting I call the previous question. Well, I do want to take advantage of the fact that Mr. Deggs is here, and I know we've talked about the removing or realigning some interstate connections and removing some, which personally I think sound terrific. And I guess I'm kind of curious from a TDOT standpoint, when you, not necessarily the entire loop, but kind of the eastern side of the downtown loop of the interstates, does kind of what we're looking at align with strategy of long-term strategy or plans that TDOT has for the interstates? And does this kind of play into what y'all are thinking, where y'all stand on this? And are there other improvements that might play into this from y'all's side of the table?
Sure. There you go. Can y'all hear me all right? So, one of the things that to keep in mind is the interstate network here in Middle Tennessee is about 50 years old. The two bridges over the Cumberland River, we have, and plus a lot of the other stuff we've identified as they are on our to-do list for replacement. And so, if we start spending millions of dollars of taxpayers' money and basically build back exactly what we had, that just doesn't look all that smart. So we have a pretty significant congestion study going on in Middle Tennessee, and frankly in all the four big metropolitan areas of the state, looking at what's going on with the traffic, doing some micro simulation models to see what are some potential changes on how we do things. If you look at the city of Chattanooga for right now, where the big foundry site is as you come around Moccasin Bend. We work with the city of Chattanooga there, and we're redoing all the frontage roads. So what we kind of envision in Nashville is a really rethinking of how that frontage road access is. One of the things Lucy's talked about is really being multimodal in nature. There's a perception out there that TDOT is the Department of Roads, Department of Highways and trucks and cars, but we're a full Department of Transportation, and really being multimodal in nature is critical. Regardless of whether we like it or not, the synergies that have come together, the private sector is making investments in this area right now. Y'all know that better than I do. And it's important that TDOT work with the city and others, we go to come up with real solutions. I'll submit to you guys that one of the real opportunities for the city of Nashville right now is that we are in a time of relative abundance in dollars. The Cleveland Street Extension project, Oracle's bringing about $1 billion in investment in private sector capital. We're doing a joint project to extend Cleveland Street. Cleveland Street is a city street. It's not a TDOT street. You guys are getting that project at about 15 cents on the dollar. The city's participation in that project is about 15% of what that project's going to cost. The state of Tennessee thinks it's important to make those investments. It's a multimodal project as well, and so when we were doing our micro simulation work, trying to come up of what could be in improving traffic flow and reducing congestion. One of the things, and I think Lucy said it well, is we've got to find ways, how can we have a multimodal network that, that makes, I-24 doesn't need to be the commuter corridor for all of the neighborhoods. Connectivity is important. The Biden administration is really interested in looking for opportunities to reconnect neighborhoods. And I think that that's one of the things where we can work together to try to bring things to the table. The IIJA, the new infrastructure bill that was passed last year, is really transformational from city's perspective. Most prior highway bills were DOT specific. The discretionary programs in this new highway bill are going to bring significant dollars to communities. Having plans in place is going to allow you to leverage dollars, state dollars. TDOT has a role. Not only am I responsible for the state highway system, but I am a steward of the federal program. And the mayor said it, if the money doesn't get spent here, it's going to go to some other state. And I'm trying to work with communities all across the state to leverage state and local resources to bring those federal dollars in to where we can get projects at cents on the dollar. And when you turn around and look at the rate of return from the private sector investment and the growth in the economy and the quality of life for communities, it can be a pretty good return on the investment. Now, to the concern about balance across the state, there's 95 counties in Tennessee. I hear you, brother. If I don't balance investment across the state, I'm 1 foot in my mouth away from getting fired every day of the week. And, I serve at the wheel. And that balance is important. But I'm not going to be able to pull a lot of these infrastructure dollars in these discretionary grant programs to build a sidewalk in Clay County, Tennessee. It just won't rank high enough. And if we've got a good project that will bring it in, bring the federal dollars in, a rising tide raises all ships. If I can bring federal dollars in to do something in one location, that will free up state and other dollars to go do, because I do have a sidewalk project in Clay County, Tennessee that I'm building, but I know I'm not going to get one of those discretionary grant programs. And so again, if I can bring more dollars into the state by working with the city, working with our transit providers to improve our economic prospect and the quality of life for our citizens, I've had a good day.
Thank you so much. Anything else from Transportation and Infrastructure Committee Chair Young? Thank you. Next, I will recognize Councilmember Mendez, I believe. You're next if you wish to. Otherwise, I could see if Councilmember Allen has any questions at this time.
He was wishing me well from my bruises yesterday. I really appreciate those comments about leveraging money and getting projects, at cents on the dollar, because really that's why it's impossible to have, again, CIB, 2 thumbs up, all the items should be in, fantastic. It's not really what this is about. When we get to having the full conversation, the fact that it costs, from what I'm hearing through the grapevine, half the property tax from the extended area that stays in the neighborhood to get that, which any neighborhood in the city would sign up for in a heartbeat, and 130 acres, half the local option sales tax for 30 years. That's got to go in that cost benefit. Like, yes, it's an opportunity to get leverage other dollars and getting projects cheaper, but it's also locking up a substantial amount of property tax and a substantial amount of sales tax for the neighborhood that exists now, and those are the move. That's why this shouldn't just be, if it wasn't a football stadium there, and maybe we should do it, maybe we shouldn't, but I think the conversation needs to be done hand in hand with $734 million of our money leveraged into how much of our state tax dollars and our federal tax dollars. It all has to go together, not just the part about leveraging, getting other people's money, because we're definitely spending a whole bunch of our own money along for the ride, and there's just no way on the finance side to separate one from the other. I'm all in favor of the CIB project items, though. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendez.
There you go. Councilmember Mendez, just to clarify, this meeting started because of a question about the stadium. And could we have some kind of meeting about that whole area before the CIB vote? And it has morphed to some degree just by looking at what information do we need and what information is out there in other ways, and at what point is it appropriate to talk about stuff. It moved more toward planning, which I think is appropriate. But I appreciate the fact that you are tying them together, and I have no problem with freely acknowledging that they go together. There's no question that they are intimately tied, and I appreciate all the comments that you've made, and I hope we didn't make you feel like you weren't supposed to bring that up. Not that it would have stopped you, but.
Well, when we were on James Robertson and Mr. Donaldson, I figured everything's fair game for a conversation. In just the same way, I really appreciate everything that all the department folks have done. I mean, you guys you're doing your jobs and having the meeting, and I totally understand how the meeting came apart and came together. Came about. And no disrespect to any of us in the body, no council members got the pull to get this many department heads and senior people in the room. I mean, this is part of the overall, we're going to do $750 million plus a stadium administration effort, and that's cool. I get it, but we should say that out loud and understand the meeting for what it is. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councilmember Mendez. What I will say is that our metro departments are very responsive to council. I think even when council members email them individually, and anytime we're having a meeting, if we give them at least a little bit of notice, I feel like our departments do a great job of trying to accommodate our meeting schedules, trying to anticipate questions and provide information and to follow up on that. So I just want to say, as a committee chair, I appreciate that, and certainly as the Metro Council representative on the Planning Commission, appreciate the strong working relationship I have with Director Kemp and all of her team. And for me, I think one of the things that I've shared with folks that Councilmember Mendez and Allen may remember from last term is that a lot of work had gone into the River North urban design overlay. I mean, a lot of work for many years. It was very thoughtful, had lots of community engagement. It did have an ECD component. And then we sort of got to one day, there was a capital spending plan that had $20 million for Cowan Street intersection improvements. And I recall some of my colleagues saying, wait, what about all the intersection improvements that are needed throughout the county? Why are we investing so much in that one? And I understand, in that context, why that might catch some folks by surprise. If the body as a whole hadn't been, each of the district council members would get busy with our own districts, and we don't necessarily pay a lot of attention to what's going on even in the district next door, much less across town. So that, for myself and I think for Councilmember Allen, wanted to sort of bring the East Bank planning study as a whole, which we've been engaged on for a while, just kind of build a little bit more awareness among the body about this planning work, which have a lot of planning work going on in the community, but how this fits into kind of a regional transportation plan that I think is exciting to Mayor Cooper, how this, we hope, will provide some solutions for what has been a longstanding problem, which is that we have land that's immediately adjacent to downtown, hypothetically is very valuable, and yet has been undeveloped for greater than a half century, largely because of the construction of the interstate, I would say, and the way that it was. And I really want to appreciate Mr. Deggs for joining us today and providing some feedback about how this might help to align with the improvements that I think will benefit everyone in the county who travels through the inner loop, whether they're on a bike lane or a street or anything like that. So,
One more question.
Councilmember Roten.
Thank you for calling on me. Mr. Deggs, I have a question for T. I guess it's for planning too. So every morning I drive in, before I get to 440, I cuss because I say this is the most poorly designed intersection I've ever seen at 40 and 440. And then I get to the 40, 24, 65 split and say, my God, this is the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. So since you're here and you were talking about redeveloping that parts of the interstate system, do you have a timeline, or is it part of our planning that is going to initiate your timeline? I guess I'm just trying to get some information, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Sure. So in 2017, we passed a piece of legislation called the Improve Act. It did several things. One of the things that we included some additional funding for transit programs across the state, but the large piece of it was about $10.5 billion and 962 projects. And so the piece of I-24, of course, the Silliman's-Evans Bridge is in it. What I call the old I-265 bridge, it's in it, and several of the bridges downtown here, plus a piece of I-24 from the Silliman-Evans going on out to the 40-24 split. Look, I grew up in Nashville. I've been here since the 60s, and my dad was with the Federal Highway Administration, so I was a junior inspector on highway projects growing up. And, we just, in the 1950s, when the interstate era was created, we just didn't know. I think, dual interstates on a single piece of pavement is probably a bad idea. You think it's bad here, go to Knoxville. So, from a time frame standpoint, I mentioned the microsimulation study we're doing. We're really looking really hard at the inner loop. When Governor Lee came in, he was really, really interested in addressing congestion in the metropolitan areas of the state. So we have a legislative intent through the Tennessee General Assembly with a lot of the projects that are out there. COVID put a big hiatus on our implementation plan, but I would think that as we roll into a likely second administration for Governor Lee, that we will see a whole lot more focus on congestion issues. I think if you put yourself in the governor's place, this administration has done a good job in recruiting industry to Tennessee. I think Oracle is a good example of that. And, we want to have a legacy of not just bringing people in and then traffic being all mucked up, of bringing people in and addressing congestion issues. And I think it's critical, and that's part of this discussion about why the state of Tennessee and the city of Nashville have to be working together. If we widened all the interstates to 50 lanes, we still have an off-ramp to get them down on the city streets. The solution to congestion is not just widening roads. It has to be multimodal. We've got to have transit programs that support the communities. I will submit to you that as a southern city that largely grew after World War II, we have underinvested in pedestrian infrastructure, and that's on the state and the city as well. So, you know, the timing, I think, is nigh for us. Really unprecedented, the opportunity for bringing big dollars into the state under federal programs and to some extent state programs. We got between $600 and $700 million of general fund money this year in our budget. Davidson County got 2 projects out of that one-time money. There were 22 projects across the state. I observed there's 95 counties. Davidson County got 2 projects. So the state of Tennessee sees opportunity in Nashville. The other project is McQuarrie Lane interchange. So it's to one of the other councilman's point is we can't just spend all the money downtown. We've got to have a spreading of the love, if you will. Did that answer what you're? Yeah. I don't have an exact. No, but look, but we're in progress.
You're like me. You've been. I was born here, and so we all know it's a 1950s system downtown with the loop, and it gives 18-wheelers a quarter mile on every single ramp to make a decision in a quarter mile which way they need to go when they're going 70, so they have to slow down to 30 to make this decision so they don't run over everybody. We all know that's the problem downtown. How much you spend or how much you do to fix that, you know, that's for y'all to decide. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Syracuse. Councilmember Roten, Councilmember Syracuse.
Thank you, Chair. Not to get too much in the weeds here, but the East Bank Redevelopment District expires in 2025?
That's correct.
That's correct. So a point that Councilmember Mendez makes is that if we're going to take 50% of the tax revenue in order to help pay for the stadium, is it kind of like a double dipping then to fund development via TIF in that area also? So how much is actually going to be coming back to the metro coffers if we're already taking 50% then plus the MDHA district? So I don't know where we head here. This is going to just, I know the stadium's got to get done, but we have that new tool that we haven't used yet or figured out how to best use it. Is it worthy of converting this to some sort of transit-oriented redevelopment district to help ensure that affordable housing is part of this whole thing?
That's a great question. I can't recall the exact number. The Finance Department or MDHA recently sent out some information with regard to our outstanding TIF districts. The East Bank Redevelopment District has 2 outstanding loans. One of those that comes to top of mind for me was for the 5th and Main project, which was initially thought to be affordable housing. I believe that there had been some updates to the Fluffo mattress building, which largely is no longer there. That's now the WeWork building. But those loans are supposed to be paid off in 2025, and so the district, I anticipate, will be expired at that time, at December 31st of 25. But the other parts of your question are very relevant of could we do something more like a transit-oriented redevelopment district in some or all of that footprint? That's a great question. All right, I do want to respect folks' time, so I'll give our presenters just a quick opportunity if you have anything else you wish to say as we conclude our meeting.
I just want to thank everyone for being here and for your thoughtful questions, and I'm happy to meet with any one of you individually. I think I speak for Director Alicorn as well. If you have follow-up questions, we're happy to sit down and talk through. I know that this has been a lot. Councilman Syracuse, I am not at a point yet where we have figured out sort of the financing or TIF strategy. Our goal is to make sure we have a comprehensive vision and a plan that illustrates the kind of development we want to see. And then I think what you're talking about is a subsequent step. So thank you for putting that on the table. But thank you, chairs, for your time today, and to all of you for being here. Thank you. Yes.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Anything from Vice Chair Allen or Co-Chair Allen? All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate everyone's time today.
has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.